The last wish of a dying man? A police K9's fight against crime. When Eva, a police officer, receives a mysterious message from a dying friend of her father, she has no idea of the danger ahead. But King, her loyal K9 partner, senses it immediately. Together, they must uncover hidden secrets, face deadly criminals, and fight for justice. Eva gripped King's leash as they hurried toward the house. The air was cold and heavy, but she didn't notice. All she could think about was Thomas Grant. He was a friend of her father, though they hadn't seen him much in recent years. Now, she was told he didn't have much time left. He wanted to see her, and she didn't know why. King, her loyal police dog, walked beside her. His dark eyes were sharp and focused, his body tense. Eva glanced down at him. King always sensed things before they happened. His instincts had saved them more than once. Right now, he was alert, as if he knew something serious was coming. When they reached the house, Thomas's daughter opened the door. Her face was drawn and tired. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "He's in his room. He's been asking for you since this morning." Eva nodded. "How is he?" The woman sighed. "Not good. The doctor said today might be his last. But he's clear-headed. He's been waiting for you." Eva stepped inside. The house felt warm, but strangely quiet. King sniffed the air and tugged gently on his leash, eager to move forward. Eva followed him down the hall to the bedroom. Thomas lay on the bed, looking thinner and weaker than she remembered. He was only in his late 50s, but the disease had aged him. His skin was pale, and dark shadows circled his eyes. Still, when he saw Eva and King, a faint smile appeared on his lips. "You came," he whispered, his voice hoarse but steady. "Of course," Eva said, stepping closer. "You wanted to see me?" Thomas nodded slowly. His eyes moved to King, who stood at the edge of the bed. "King," he said softly. "Good to see you, boy." Eva frowned. "You know King?" Thomas let out a weak chuckle. "I've followed your work. Your father told me about the cases you two solved. King's a special dog." King moved closer, sensing the man's fragile state. Thomas reached out a trembling hand and gently patted his head. His gaze turned serious. "Listen carefully, Eva," he said, his voice low but urgent. "There's something you need to find. A secret, one I couldn't tell anyone else. Only the King can help you now." Eva leaned in, confused. "What secret? What do you mean?" But Thomas closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His body relaxed as if he were too tired to speak anymore. Eva waited for him to say more, but he didn't. His breathing slowed, then stopped. The silence that followed was heavy and final. "Thomas," Eva whispered. No response. Thomas's daughter entered the room and froze. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh no, he's gone, isn't he?" Eva nodded slowly. She stepped back, her thoughts racing. What secret was Thomas talking about? Why had he said only King could help? King gently nudged her hand, sensing her distress. She looked down at him and gave a small nod. "It's okay, boy," she murmured. "We'll figure this out." Later that evening, Eva sat at her desk in her apartment. The events of the day haunted her. She had brought home a photo of Thomas from his room. In it, he was younger, standing near a large oak tree. Eva couldn't shake the feeling that the photo was important. King lay at her feet, but he wasn't resting. His ears twitched, and his eyes stayed on the photo on her desk. He let out a quiet whine and stood up, pacing the room. "What's wrong, King?" Eva asked. He rarely acted like this unless something was bothering him. She decided to call her partner, Sam. He picked up after a few rings. "Hey, Eva, everything okay?" "Not really," Eva said, running a hand through her hair. "Thomas Grant died today. But before he did, he told me to find some secret. He said only King could help." There was a pause before Sam spoke again. "You're not serious, are you? The guy was probably out of it. People say strange things when they're at the end." "I don't think so," Eva replied. "He seemed clear-headed, and King's been acting weird ever since." Sam sighed. "Look, it's probably nothing. Don't stress yourself over it. You've had a long day." "Yeah," Eva muttered, though she wasn't convinced. She hung up and looked at King, who had stopped pacing and was now sitting near the door. He stared at her with an intensity that made her uneasy. "You want to go out?" she asked. King barked softly in response. "All right, boy," Eva said with a sigh. She grabbed her jacket and the leash. "Let's see where you want to go." They walked in the cool night air, King leading the way. Eva didn't know where they were going, but she trusted him. He had never been wrong before. Memories of her father and Thomas filled her mind. Her dad had always spoken highly of Thomas, calling him a man who knew how to keep important promises. Could this be one of those promises? King suddenly stopped at the entrance of an old park. Eva recognized the large oak tree from the photo. It stood in the center, its branches spreading wide like protective arms. Her heart raced. Why had King brought her here? "This is the tree from the picture," she whispered. King sniffed the base of the tree, circling it a few times before barking twice. Eva crouched beside him, running her hand over the bark. She noticed faint carvings, letters, and numbers, but they were too worn to read clearly. "What is this, King?" she murmured. "Is this what Thomas wanted us to find?" King barked again, more urgently this time. Eva felt a shiver run down her spine. Whatever this was, it wasn't random. It meant something. "All right, boy," she said quietly. "We'll figure this out. Together." King's tail wagged, and for the first time that day, Eva felt a spark of determination. Thomas's last words weren't just meaningless ramblings. They were a mission, and King was ready. The two of them walked deeper into the park, moonlight guiding their steps. Eva's mind was set. She wasn't going to stop until she found the truth hidden in Thomas's final wish. The moonlight still shone over the park as Eva and King stood near the oak tree. Eva looked at the carvings on the tree again. She didn't know what they meant, but her instincts told her there was more to find. King sniffed the ground around the tree one last time, then pulled gently on his leash. "You want to keep moving?" Eva asked softly. King barked and wagged his tail. He wasn't done yet. Eva sighed and stood up. "All right, let's see where this takes us." The next morning, Eva decided to visit Thomas's house again. She needed answers. If there was a secret, she had to find it. King walked beside her, focused and alert. When they reached the house, Thomas's daughter was waiting by the door. "Eva, I wasn't sure you'd come back," she said with a sad smile. "I need to check something," Eva explained. "It might sound strange, but I think your dad left me a clue." The woman frowned, but nodded. "You're welcome to look around. I'll be in the kitchen if you need me." Eva stepped inside with King. The house felt even quieter than before. The air was heavy, like the walls themselves were holding secrets. King sniffed the floor, his ears twitching as he moved from room to room. Eva followed him closely. They reached the living room. The furniture was old and covered in dust. Thomas had spent most of his last days in this house, and it showed. King circled the room slowly, then stopped near a corner of the floor. He sniffed intensely, his nose brushing the wooden boards. Suddenly, he scratched at the floor. Eva crouched down. "What is it, boy?" King scratched again, more urgently this time. Eva touched the floorboards and noticed one felt loose. She pried it up carefully. Beneath the board was a small compartment. Inside, she found a folded piece of paper and a faded photograph. Eva unfolded the paper. It was a map. The lines and markings were clear, though some parts were smudged with age. She couldn't recognize the area at first glance. Then, she turned her attention to the photograph. It showed Thomas standing next to her father. They both looked younger and happy. In the background, there was an old building, a factory maybe. King barked softly and wagged his tail. He seemed pleased, as if saying, "See, I found it." Eva smiled and rubbed his head. "Good job, King. You really are something else." She studied the map again. The markings led to a location outside of town. The name of the place caught her attention, an old factory. Eva had heard stories about it. Years ago, it had been a hideout for criminals. Her father had once mentioned that Thomas worked hard to protect the area from gangs back then. Could this be connected? "We have to check this out," Eva whispered. King barked again in agreement. By the time they arrived at the factory, the sun was high in the sky. The building was large and worn down. Broken windows and rusted metal beams made it look dangerous. Vines grew along the walls, giving the place an abandoned feel. Eva felt a chill as she stood at the entrance. She had her police badge and phone, but that didn't make her feel safe. Something about the place felt wrong. King sniffed the air, his body tense. His ears twitched as he listened to the sounds around them. Eva could tell he was on high alert. He stayed close to her side as they stepped inside. The factory was dark and cold. Their footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. Dust floated in the air, catching the faint beams of sunlight that came through the broken windows. King sniffed the ground, following an invisible trail. Eva stayed quiet, letting him lead the way. They moved through empty hallways and large rooms filled with rusted machines. The deeper they went, the more uneasy Eva felt. King's posture grew stiff, his head low as he moved carefully. He stopped suddenly and growled softly. Eva froze. "What is it, King?" King sniffed a nearby doorway, then backed away. Eva peered inside. There was nothing but piles of scrap metal and old crates. Still, she trusted King's instincts. He never reacted like this unless there was danger nearby. She whispered, "Let's keep moving, boy." King led her down another hallway. This time he seemed more focused. His nose stayed close to the floor as he followed the trail. Finally, they reached a room at the back of the building. The door was slightly open. King nudged it with his nose, and it creaked loudly as it swung inward. The room was different from the others. There were no broken machines or piles of junk. Instead, a table stood in the center, covered in papers and old photographs. Eva walked over and carefully examined them. Some of the papers were maps, similar to the one she found in Thomas's house. Others had names and dates scribbled on them. Eva picked up one of the photographs. It showed a group of men standing outside the factory. She recognized two faces, Thomas and her father. The other men looked rough, like they had lived hard lives. Were they part of the gang her father had mentioned? King barked softly, pulling her out of her thoughts. He sniffed a small metal box on the floor near the table. Eva knelt down and opened it. Inside were more papers, including a handwritten letter. She read it carefully. The letter was from Thomas. In it, he explained everything. Years ago, the factory had been a hideout for a gang. Thomas had pretended to join them to protect the town. He gathered information and helped the police take down the gang leaders. But not everyone had been caught. Some members had escaped, and Thomas had spent years watching over the area, fearing they might return. Eva's heart ached as she read the letter. Thomas had carried this burden alone. He had never told anyone, not even her father. He had kept the secret to protect the people he cared about. Now, with his illness taking over, he had trusted Eva to finish what he started. King nudged her gently, sensing her emotions. She looked at him and smiled through her tears. "We're going to finish this, King. We owe it to him." As they left the factory, Eva felt a new sense of purpose. Thomas had sacrificed so much to keep others safe. She wouldn't let his efforts be in vain. She knew there were still questions to answer. What happened to the gang members who escaped? Were they still out there? And what else did Thomas's clues hide? King walked proudly beside her, his tail wagging gently. He had led her to the truth, just like Thomas had said. Eva knew they had a long road ahead, but she wasn't afraid. With King by her side, she could face anything. The sun shone brighter now, cutting through the shadows that had haunted her earlier. This was only the beginning, but Eva was ready. Together, she and King would uncover every secret Thomas had left behind. They walked toward the future with confidence, leaving the abandoned factory and its dark past behind them. Eva parked the car near the factory entrance. The sky was gray, and the wind howled through the broken windows of the building. She clenched her fists, trying to steady her nerves. Thomas's letter had warned her that some of the gang members might still be around. If they were here, she had to be ready for anything. King hopped out of the car and stood beside her, alert and focused. His ears twitched as he listened to the sounds around them. He sniffed the air, then growled softly. "Easy, boy," Eva said, placing a hand on his back. She could feel the tension in his body. He knew there was danger nearby. "Let's take it slow." King led the way inside the factory. The cold air inside smelled of rust and decay. Their footsteps echoed across the empty halls. Eva scanned the area, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. King kept his nose close to the ground, following a scent trail. Every few steps, he paused and sniffed the air again. They moved deeper into the building. Eva's heartbeat quickened. She didn't like how quiet it was. King suddenly stopped in front of a heavy metal door. He sniffed around it and growled softly again. "There's something here, isn't there?" Eva whispered. King barked once in response. She pushed the door open slowly. The room on the other side was dark and cluttered with old shelves and boxes. Eva pulled out a flashlight and shone it around. Papers and dusty files were scattered across the floor. Some of the shelves held old tools and equipment. In the corner, she saw a stack of files that looked recently disturbed. Eva knelt down to examine them. She found papers with names and dates, records of people who had worked with the gang years ago. This had to be what Thomas was trying to hide. She grabbed a handful of the files and stuffed them into her bag. King growled again, this time louder. Eva froze. "What is it, King?" she whispered, her voice tense. Before she could react, footsteps echoed from behind. She turned and saw 3 men enter the room. Their faces were hard and angry. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. "Looks like we have company," he said with a sneer. "What are you doing here, lady?" Eva stood slowly, trying to stay calm. "I'm just here for some old files. I don't want any trouble." "Too bad," the man said, cracking his knuckles. "You shouldn't have come here." Eva reached for her radio, but one of the other men lunged at her, knocking it out of her hand. She stumbled, but before the man could grab her, King leapt forward, teeth bared. He sank his jaws into the attacker's arm, making him scream in pain. "King!" Eva shouted, her heart racing. The man shook his arm violently, trying to throw King off, but King held on. The other 2 men rushed toward Eva. One grabbed her by the wrist, yanking her away from the door. Eva struggled, kicking and twisting, but his grip was strong. "Let her go!" Another voice yelled, her own voice in her head urging her to fight. She swung her free hand, hitting the man in the face. He cursed and loosened his grip just enough for her to break free. King released the man he had bitten and turned to face the other attackers. He growled fiercely, his body tense and ready. The men hesitated, clearly unnerved by the large dog's presence. "Let's get out of here," one of them said. "This isn't worth it." The scarred man glared at Eva. "You're lucky today," he snarled. "But this isn't over." He and the others backed away, disappearing into the shadows of the factory. Eva panted, her adrenaline still high. She turned to King and saw him limping slightly. Blood dripped from a gash on his side. "Oh no!" "King," she whispered, rushing to his side. She knelt down and gently touched his fur. "You're hurt." King wagged his tail weakly and licked her hand. His eyes remained steady and calm, as if to say, "I'm okay. Don't worry." Tears welled up in Eva's eyes. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I should have been more careful. You shouldn't have had to fight for me." King nudged her gently with his nose, reassuring her. Despite his pain, he stood tall, refusing to show weakness. His loyalty and courage brought a lump to her throat. She wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. "We have to get out of here," she said, her voice steadier now. "Come on, boy. Let's get you some help." King barked softly and followed her as they made their way out of the factory. Eva kept a hand on his back, guiding him carefully over the broken floor. The sunlight outside was blinding after the darkness inside. Eva shielded her eyes and led King to the car. Once inside, she checked his wound again. It wasn't deep, but it still worried her. "We'll go to the vet," she said gently. "You'll be all right. I promise." King rested his head on her lap, closing his eyes. Eva stroked his fur, feeling a mixture of guilt and gratitude. He had risked everything to protect her. She couldn't let his bravery go to waste. Thomas had trusted them to finish this mission, and Eva knew she couldn't back down now. As they drove away from the factory, Eva's mind raced. The gang members knew she had found something important. They wouldn't give up easily, but neither would she. With King by her side, she felt stronger. They had come too far to stop now. "We'll figure this out," she whispered. Together, Eva sat beside King in the vet's office. His side was bandaged, and he rested quietly on a soft blanket. The vet assured her the injury wasn't serious. King just needed time to rest, but Eva couldn't wait too long. She knew the gang might return to the factory and destroy the evidence. If that happened, everything Thomas had sacrificed would be lost. "How are you feeling, buddy?" she whispered, gently stroking his fur. King opened his eyes and licked her hand. His tail gave a small wag. Eva smiled softly. "You're not giving up, are you?" King lifted his head and barked softly, as if to say, "Let's go." Eva's heart swelled with pride and warmth. He was ready. They had to finish what they started. That night, they drove back to the factory. Eva parked far from the entrance and turned off the headlights. She didn't want to alert anyone inside. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the building. Eva tightened her grip on King's leash. "We have to be careful this time," she whispered. "They'll be expecting us." King stood tall, ears perked and alert. He sniffed the air and scanned the area with sharp eyes. Eva trusted him completely. He had always sensed danger before it appeared. Tonight would be no different. They moved silently across the empty lot, staying close to the walls of the factory. King suddenly stopped and sniffed the ground. His body tensed. Eva knelt beside him. "What is it, King?" King's nose twitched as he sniffed around a pile of rubble. He growled softly and moved to the side, avoiding the pile. Eva followed him and noticed a thin wire stretched across the ground. A trap. If they had walked over it, it might have triggered an alarm or worse. "Good boy," she whispered, giving him a pat. "You saved us again." King led her through the building, carefully avoiding other traps and dangerous areas. They moved deeper into the factory, the air growing colder. Eva's heartbeat quickened. She knew they were getting close. King paused again, his ears tilting toward a hallway on the right. He growled softly and looked up at Eva. He had found something, or someone. Eva crouched low and whispered, "Okay, boy, let's take this slow." They crept down the hallway, moving quietly toward the sound of muffled voices. King stopped at a doorway and sniffed the air. Eva peeked through a crack in the door. Inside, she saw several gang members, including the scarred man from before. He was pacing angrily, shouting orders. "Pack up those files," he barked. "We're leaving tonight. Burn anything we don't need." Eva's stomach twisted. If they destroyed the files, all the evidence Thomas had hidden would be gone. She had to act fast. She leaned close to King and whispered, "I need you to distract them, boy. Just for a little while. Can you do that?" King's eyes gleamed with understanding. He wagged his tail once and backed away from the door. Eva waited until he was out of sight, then positioned herself near a stack of crates. She needed to be ready when King made his move. Moments later, a loud bark echoed through the factory. The gang members froze. "What was that?" one of them asked, looking around nervously. The barking grew louder, and King darted past the doorway, just long enough to catch their attention. The men grabbed flashlights and weapons, rushing after him. "Find that dog," the scarred man shouted. "Don't let it get away." As the men chased King, Eva slipped into the room. She quickly scanned the area and found a metal cabinet filled with files. She grabbed as many as she could, stuffing them into her bag. Her hands shook as she worked. She knew King was buying her time, but he couldn't hold them off forever. Outside, she heard shouting and growling. Her heart pounded. She had to hurry. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hall. One of the gang members had returned, carrying a large folder. He muttered to himself as he approached the door. Eva ducked behind a crate, holding her breath. The man didn't see her. He moved toward the exit, clutching the folder tightly. Eva knew that folder had to be important. She couldn't let him escape with it. Before she could act, King appeared at the end of the hallway, blocking the man's path. His growl was low and threatening. The man froze in fear, his eyes wide. "Get out of my way, you stupid dog," he shouted, raising a metal bar. King didn't flinch. He bared his teeth and stepped closer, his growl deepening. The man hesitated, then tried to run the other way. King lunged, snapping at his heels and forcing him to drop the folder. The man stumbled and fell, scrambling to get away. Eva rushed forward, grabbing the folder. "King, let him go," she shouted. King backed off but kept a close eye on the man as he fled. Eva quickly secured the folder in her bag and knelt beside King. "You did it, boy," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "You stopped him." King wagged his tail, panting but alert. Eva hugged him tightly, feeling a wave of relief and gratitude. "You're a hero, King. We couldn't have done this without you." The police arrived soon after, arresting the remaining gang members. Eva handed over the files and explained everything. The officers praised King for his bravery, calling him a true police dog. Eva couldn't have been prouder. Later that night, Eva sat with King outside the factory. The danger was finally over. She pulled out a letter she had found in one of the files. It was from Thomas. In the letter, he explained why he had trusted her and King. He believed that King's instincts and loyalty would be the key to solving the mystery. "You were right, Thomas," Eva whispered. "King really is special." A few days later, Eva and King visited her father's grave. The sun was warm, and the grass swayed gently in the breeze. Eva knelt beside the headstone and placed a small medal on King's collar. "We did it, Dad," she said softly. "Thomas trusted us, and we finished what he started. You be proud of King. He's a true hero." King barked softly and wagged his tail. Eva smiled and stood up. Together, they walked away from the grave, ready to face whatever the future held. They had proven that courage, loyalty, and trust could overcome any danger.